If you want to talk disadvantages, when we made the switch to the May calving, we did have years where we would see a dip in reproduction, in breed ups initially, but you know it's a multi-faceted kind of thing where we changed so many things and taken away so many inputs. I mean, we've tried going without mineral. We've tried just no feeding to the point where, hey, maybe they should have had a bale that day, so we've worked through those disadvantages. They were little bumps along the way. They still, were totally worth making the switch, even in spite of those things. The breed ups now are, 93%. We're happy with our numbers now. So what we get. So
this last year, took the big steers. There's like 300 steers to a feedlot. And they were finished about the time when that fire in that packing plant went on. And we kept the later steers, run them back on grass, sold them as long yearlings. And I know that fire and whatever else caused those fat cattle prices to take a dip, but we nearly got the same dollars per head. And you know that we had a fraction of the input in them. We used to sell calves off the cow, get them as big as we could, creep them, whatever we had to do, implant them, whatever, get them as big, all those dollars. Well, it probably doesn't work that way now, but that's been our marketing. We've had to change our position a little bit, but I think it's working pretty well.
But I wanted big cows because I thought big cows wean big calves, and big calves is where the money is, right? Big calf, big check. Well, these same people that I got to hanging around with started talking about the advantages of raising smaller cattle. For instance, if you sell a semi-load of cattle that weighs 50,000 pounds, a semi-load of 500-pound calves will bring you a larger check than a semi of 700-pound calves. So that got me to thinking, maybe I don't need to raise the biggest calves to make the most money. In both cases, this is radically different than the way I used to feed. So many bales per day with a tractor, unrolled them, and made several trips out to that bunch of cows each day. Now with the bale grazing cows, I turned them into 2 weeks worth of bales yesterday, so I probably won't start a tractor up at that location for 2 weeks. At the other place, I'm hauling out half as many bales as I used to because the other half is being replaced with corn. If I didn't have the calves on them, I wouldn't need to feed as much corn as I am, but corn is pretty cheap right now. Why not give them a little bit extra? Anyway, that's what I'm doing right now. But what I found for me works well is to hire one of my neighbors to plant my corn. He's got a better planter, he does better seed placement, and he gets it done in like 2 days. So I'm trying to find which of these labor-intensive tasks am I better off hiring done, and which am I better off doing my own. On the input side, I've enjoyed not spending as much money on the crop ground that I've planted back to grass. I've really enjoyed not having to spray it, not having to be in the tractor out there planting it the whole time. It doesn't dollar out as well as I hoped it would. For instance, but it dollars out okay.
So the increased profitability of going to May calving is multifaceted. Number one, you have less inputs because the cow doesn't demand the level of nutrition since she's not in lactation. So that's one thing. The other thing is you're saving on labor. I think without exception, I can't imagine it being any other way. You end up with more live calves. And so there's a multiple set of reasons why it's more profitable to calve in May. And everybody has this concern that, well, my calves aren't going to be as big. They aren't going to be as profitable. But I can tell you, by the time you figure the profitability in from not calving in winter conditions, you figure in the fact that you have less labor, you figure in the fact that you have more live calves, it's pretty tough. And I think without most exceptions anyhow, that anybody I've talked to is more profitable in the long run.
It brings in low-cost production and low-cost wintering, and that's always a challenge.
I also realized that anything that was calving late, if it was calving in May, usually those calves were about the same size when it came to November anyway. And I had to ask myself, I talked to others who were already calving at a later time in May, and so you know, they talked about just the decrease in feed costs, because that was the other thing. And to some extent, we also had to realize that saving a calf wasn't necessarily going to make us profitable. If we were going to lose, you know, 2 or 3% of our calves, well, we were probably still going to be profitable because we just had that much less into them, and it was just a lot less. Just in today's, you know, economy, I guess what I've seen is that calving later like that, being able to run those cows cheaper, and then typically I'm keeping those calves until the following spring. I'm actually able to hit a little bit better market than trying to sell them in the fall, as you know, you get the big run of calves. They are, you know, my conversions are nothing to get crazy about, because my daily gains just aren't what some others would be, but they're cheap. That's probably the biggest thing, is it's profitable. It's not something where I had to put a lot of money in order to get them to this point, and so they're able to sell at a good profit. And then, you know, I've followed them through the rest of their lives, and to keep tabs on how well they grow, because I want to make sure that I'm producing a quality product, and I've seen good success. They really do well all the way through the rest of their life cycles.
Your gross dollars could be negatively impacted with calving at a later date if you mark it on a set date in the fall. But it might not negatively impact your net income as much as you think, because of reduced inputs. There is less labor when you calve later. You know, in theory, you should have less expense with things like sickness, because of the, you know, the cattle are more spread out. You're not calving them in as much of a confined area. And as far as the fall is concerned, as far as price, yes, you probably will have less gross dollars, but probably not as much as you think. If you're 60 pounds lighter, you know, your price per pound is going to be higher. I'm not gonna try and tell you your income, gross income per calf is going to be the same, but I think you'll find it's not going to be reduced as much as people thought.
I think the profitability has mostly to do with how much is left. You know, when you take that income and then you take off of what you put in to the expense side of it, whatever's left is the most important thing.
Why is that calf bigger than this calf? And it was like, well, yeah, his calf might be bigger than my calf, but do I have more calves, and do I sell more gross pounds of cattle off the place with less amount of feed and less amount of work?
Yeah, the marketing, of course you're going to get lighter calves, but if a guy studied the markets, if you don't have a weaning a 750 pound calf, you might as well have a 450 pound. Dollar for dollar, they're worth as much. But the biggest deal is we've cut our input costs in less than half of what it used to be. Our diesel fuel bill alone, the amount of diesel went from 1,600 gallons down to 300. So I mean, the savings on that is across the board for everything. And you know, the stress on your machinery and the whole works. I mean, it's to me, I will never change. I was asked one time on an interview if I'd ever go back to March calving, and I said there's only one way, and that's if I find some land down in Texas. That's the only way I'll go back to March calving. There's a perception out there that this is when we have to do it. We have to raise that big calf. And people kept moving it back so they could get that bigger calf. But we've lost sight of the cost of production. And that was the driving force for us, was cost of production versus what we're going to get out of it. Well, I figured that we could get less money and put less into that cow. But I don't think there's enough people that knows how to figure the cost of production. They're not figuring it right, and they think it doesn't matter when you do that. When you calve, the cost of production is the same. It's not. Your feed cost is between 50 and 80% of your winter, or of the cost of the production of that calf. And in our case, at 5 to 7 pounds of hay a day through the winter is way less than that 35 to 40 pounds of hay every day, plus the high energy feed that I have to feed them to keep them in shape to calve in March. You can't let a cow slip if you're going to calve in March. You have to keep them in good shape. Our cows get pretty skinny through the winter. It doesn't look good because we're always told we got to raise a bigger calf. We don't. We just have to raise a live calf and lower our inputs, and we can make this work for anybody. Mother Nature made it work before we got so smart. I think we can get a little bit smarter and let it work for us.
Finances, when we changed to a later calving date, our expenses drastically dropped and our income raised because we didn't have to buy all the hay for the cows. We weren't spending all of the vet supplies on the calving. We weren't have to supplementing so much. So a lot of the feed and vet bills drastically dropped, even our electric, our propane, because we were having to run the heating box on the calves during the other few months. Yeah, I had huge opportunities when our expenses went down because I didn't have to work full-time at a job, where before I was, because we had 4 kids at home, we were kind of struggling. So when we started changing things where we knew our financially and our stability was a lot stronger, then I was able to stay home and be back to being the housewife, ranch wife.
And, now, our cows are 3 miles from home out grazing grass, and we feed them a little cake or a little protein, and just saves a ton of money. Every day you can graze instead of hauling feed out is profit, I think.
Yeah, profitability isn't on the back end or on the front end. It's really a combination of both. And the one thing about on the front end, on controlling input costs, is that money's tax-free. You get to just put it right back in your pocket and you don't have to pay tax on it. So the money on the other end is you have to pay income tax on, and it's really a both. But the thing is, the lighter calves that we were selling really weren't bringing that much less than everybody else's heavier calves. But we had so much less into them on the front end that it's a double win. It's a win-win situation as far as profitability of the ranch.
Marketing is a huge fear factor, and it's always one of my big issues. But I am really transitioning. Not only am I transitioning to May calving, I'm transitioning to a different style herd, not style, I guess, frame. I was in the process, what everybody was, is chasing pounds for years. And now I'm looking at getting my score frame down to a moderate frame. I want a nice smaller cow that's going to work for me instead of putting a lot of high inputs to large frame cows where I'm weaning not even 50% of the cow's body weight, and that's not very efficient. Even though I got low input, it's still not efficient when your calf's not 50% of her mama. I've already seen savings on the input because I kind of already was a low input ranch, and the only big inputs was I was chasing is I did it through my cows. Tried not to overfeed them, and I did it through bull selection and all this, but I've already seen big benefits of it.
Well, we've had at least 4 feet of snow since November. We tried to manage through that as best we could, but finally this grass is just down. And so we've had to hay, and it's really turned those cows, made them lazy, and they've just stopped grazing. But we feed every other day, just enough to keep them take the rough edges off the environment. And my wife's been going with me with the baby. She's been cutting that wrap off for me. And we got done at 10 o'clock or so. And I said, well, that's not too bad, honey. We just spent $1,000 before 10 o'clock in the morning.